Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. So, let's talk about Remembrance Day a little bit and why there are certain things about this day and how people react to certain things that just really bothers me. Now, some of more eagle-eyed viewers might point out that this is actually the first time I'm wearing one of these since the video where I talked about Whole Foods and the whole poppy backlash that was happening in Canada last week. And this isn't to say that I don't wear a poppy. Normally I do. It's usually on a coat, and then I might, if I'm lucky, have a second one that I can pin to, my, work shirt, collar lapel, or something like that. But there's always, no matter what, and we've seen it this year with the Whole Foods controversy, each year there is always some kind of controversy around the poppy and Remembrance Day, and I am beyond tired of it. Some historical background in terms of my family. So, my grandfather, who died before I was born, did serve in World War II. He's, this scrappy little French Canadian guy, and so they stuck him in the back of a giant bomber, and he managed to survive the war. Many others didn't. So for me, growing up, it was also about remembering sort of what he and others like him had to go through in that war, and then you also learn about the First World War, which is where we get the whole poppies from the poem in Flanders Field, which was written by a Canadian soldier, John McCrae. So there is a very Canadian aspect to this, if you want to call it a holiday, but it feels kind of wrong to call Remembrance Day a holiday. But no matter what, depending on who's in charge when they make the speeches, sometimes they can be nice, other times they can be very nationalistic, and that should concern a lot of people. And there's always some kind of controversy, right? We've seen this year's already. Then there was also when the white poppy thing first started, there was controversy around that. And if you want to wear a white poppy, that's fine. There are very valid and justified reasons to do so. Just talk to people who wear a white poppy. They'll explain it to you. And there are some businesses and sleazy politicians who misappropriate this poppy. And it just feels icky when that happens. But for me, there's also this weird notion, which again goes back to who's in charge and who makes the speeches, about what this represents and what we're remembering. And so sometimes it's very nationalistic and kind of scary, makes you raise an eyebrow. And there's also sometimes these guys who talk about freedom, like they fought for Canada's freedom, but even growing up, I never fully understood how that was the case. And already I know there's going to be people on both sides of the argument who just got really mad, and they're going to be mad at me no matter what I say or do at the end of this video. But World War I was started because of a pissing match between great European powers, and then those with colonial empires. When they declared war, their colonies were automatically at war as well. Canada didn't declare war on the German Empire. We were automatically at war after the British Empire declared it because we were a part of the British Empire. So how did... And the reason why the British declared war on the German Empire was because of the British saying, hey, don't invade Belgium. We guarantee their neutrality. But the Germans invaded Belgium to try and get to France, to try and knock out France from the war early on. And so Britain declared war. So how did that somehow result in threatening Canadian freedom? See what I mean? And in World War II, there's a bit more of an argument for it, but I'll get to that in a second. So yes, in World War II, which my grandfather fought in, he literally fought against fascists in the skies of Europe. And that should be commended and celebrated and remembered and honored. But to hear, at least secondhand, from my grandfather's perspective and the perspective of other veterans who I've met while raising money for the Royal Canadian Legion, to hear a lot of them say it, it wasn't necessarily about, them feeling threatened that, Canada was somehow under threat. They felt a moral duty to fight for the freedom of those trapped in Europe, suffering under the yoke of fascism and other related tyrannies. And again, that is worthy of praise and support, that they felt a moral obligation to fight for the freedom of people they didn't even know. That is good to me. That represents a strong moral compass. But was it, freedom for Canada? I feel like it just would have been the Cold War, but just with fascists if we hadn't fought against them, because there's still that massive ocean between us. Iceland would have been the front lines as opposed to Newfoundland and Labrador. And to hear from a lot of, including some very funny veterans that I've met in the past, their prerogative was, I felt I had a moral duty to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. That just strikes me as amazing and worthy of respect. But was that freedom for Canada? No, but it was definitely for someone else's freedom. It was freedom for the French, the Belgians, the Dutch, Germans who did not like the Nazi regime, for those in Northern and Eastern Europe, for those in Italy and North Africa. Yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. But this notion that some people will try and say that it was about fighting for our freedom and that our freedoms are a result of a European pissing match in World War I and fighting against fascists in World War II. Well, then how did we get our quote-unquote inherent freedoms if our Constitution and Sir John A. Macdonald were so important? How did that all happen in 1867 then? What veterans died in 1866 for us to have the freedoms in 1867? That's what never was able to be squared away in my mind about this. Did people in World War II, and even some friends that I know who fought in the Afghan war, did they fight for freedom? Yeah, for the freedom of Afghans who were suffering under the brutal Taliban. There is a difference between fighting for your own freedoms and fighting for someone else's freedoms, and yet sometimes I find this distinction is lost, and I find that far too often people just want to jump down people's throats on Remembrance Day if it's not perfect or it's not lockstep with how they imagine things should be. Even in my Whole Foods video, there was, I don't know, 2, I think, or maybe 3 different people who immediately jumped in the comment section just raging about, oh no, screw this poppy, white poppy, blah, blah, blah. Why? What's the point? For me, at the end of the day, I choose to celebrate and honor and remember those who died on Remembrance Day in wars past, because in many cases they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a choice to serve because of a draft or a choice to go to war. They just kind of were. Or there were many who did sign up because of some deep moral value. And so while I may rage against the state and rage against the corrupt ruling class and the capitalists who profit off of war, I will still choose to remember the hundreds of thousands of Canadians at this point who have died in past wars. I choose to remember the dead because they died. It's really that simple. I just honor that sacrifice because at one point I was like them, a young teenager full of hope and optimism for the future. And in a different world or a different timeline, there may have been a different war and I may be counted among the dead, my name on a memorial or a cenotaph somewhere. My name marked or unmarked in a grave in some foreign country. I don't know. And so because of that, I still choose to honor the sacrifice of those people. It's not about the bullshit politics. It's not about silly controversies or which poppy is better so that I can wave some kind of morally righteous flag of superiority over someone else. Thousands upon thousands of Canadians are dead. Some for ostensibly good and noble reasons, others for not so good and noble reasons. Either way, I choose to honor the dead and the ultimate sacrifice that they had to pay. And the fact that this video and this little rant that I've done is going to piss off people no matter what, when we can't just agree that, you know what, yeah, honor the dead. That's a sacrifice. It's a shame that anyone had to die for any of these reasons. And yet apparently that might just be too controversial. And that ultimately, at the end of this supposed to be somber and solemn day, is what's bothering me today.